Oi, oi, it's your boy, the Julia Nerosa of sipping a mimosa on a Sunday morning and talking about fights. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC. Do you remember who was fighting? Another big night at the Apex. I'm gonna go. I'm just gonna ramble. Any minute you get over 10 minutes today, I would consider a bonus because it was not a lot of significant stuff on this card. I was chatting to a friend the other day, and he was saying, like, I appreciate you like the technical fights, but I just want to see someone get pinged. And in fairness, some of the people on this card got pinged. Problem is, you can't know beforehand, and a lot of these guys on this card beforehand, it's kind of like, why would I watch 3 women's MMA fights almost back to back? Or Gabe Green, his best performance up to this point was like having a dull fight with Ian Gary. However, a lot of guys actually delivered, so let's be positive. Main event, Michael Morales versus Gilbert Burns. I felt like this would happen. Michael Morales has had a very sort of meh career in the UFC so far. He came in, we went, oh my god, look at the size of that welterweight. He's got a weird-ass tattoo on his right pec that people kept telling me was my logo, but it isn't. If you want to see a real fighter, a real slacky boy with that logo on his pec, David Martinez from Eternal FC. But Morales came into the UFC in 2022, banged out Trevin Giles, banged out Adam Fuggett. Both those guys quite famous for being a bit on the chinny side. And then it was 2 decisions against old men. Finally got the Neil Magny bump, the Neil Magny rub, which is like the UFC going, hey, people still sort of know Neil Magny's name, and if you hit him hard at some point, he'll curl up in a ball and give you a highlight, which he did. But up until this point, it's been like, I described Michael Morales as looking like the kind of monster you'd make on a creator fighter in EA UFC, and also having all the moves of a creator fighter that you've just started playing as on EA UFC. He doesn't do an awful lot. But I knew, with Gilbert Burns being on the way out, if he got a knockout here, people would be like, oh my god, welterweight division, absolutely stacked. We've got all these guys. We've got Jack Della Maddalena, we've got Ian Gary, we've got Shavkat Rakhmonov, we've got Sean Brady, we've got Michael Morales. And it's like, I don't think he's actually in that sort of discussion at the moment. He's sort of in the Joaquin Buckley level of discussion, where some people are going to convince themselves that he's looking like a world beater and deserves a title shot right now, and other people will go, why is he targeting exclusively unks? Why are all his wins over guys who are nearing 50 years old and who have had 100 fights? Buckley heard that criticism and lined up a fight with Kamaru Usman, who again is almost 40, has no knees, is on a 3-fight losing streak, and hasn't fought in a year and a half. But he's still known. People know his name, and that's the important point. Anyway, Michael Morales came out against Gilbert Burns, smoked him, obviously. The stuff about Morales that's interesting is that he is so big and so long and made out of iron. He's got this jab, which he uses, which we like, but there wasn't an awful lot of difference technically between the jab that Michael Morales is using here and the jab that we're all making fun of Elise Reed doing in the prelims, where she poked at her jab with her chin up in the air and her eyes closed and her right hand down by her chest. And I pointed out that that's how Paddy Pimblett used to throw his jab. Paddy Pimblett used to try and jab and also sort of look at what was happening from above too. He'd lift his chin up and like, oh, what's going on over there on the end of my fist? But Michael Morales, as I've said, is gigantic. Gilbert Burns is very small for the weight class, so it was even more obvious in this one. And he's also just like carved out of marble, because in this fight, numerous times, he steps in with his left hand, his right hand's in the middle of his chest, and Gilbert Burns twats him with an enormous left swing, the exact same left swing that knocked out like Damian Maia. Didn't he floor Kamaru Usman at one point when Usman was champion? The big left swing that he's always looking for. You can watch it move Morales' head a foot to the right. And Morales doesn't even react. He just hits him back. You go, well, that's the brilliant thing about youth And also, just genetics and natural ability to take a punch. But that is going to get him hurt at some point. The fact that he punches, he goes, here's my left hand, while his right hand is loading up down by his waist. I mean, the one that he did to, the punch that he landed to hurt Gilbert at the start, was he slapped him with his left hand while his right hand was loading up below his waist. The fucking Bugs Bunny windmill uppercut. But then, JDS, Junior Dos Santos used to do that all the time, slipping in that big uppercut by doing a slappy left hook. George Foreman used to do it all the time. It's like George Foreman, R.I.P., rest in power, big fella, fought Joe Frazier. Foreman was famous for this big swinging uppercut. Frazier was famous for this enormous left hook that knocked out everybody. Coming into that fight, the right read on it was like, well, Joe Frazier's always bending forward at the waist, so the uppercut's going to be a problem for him. But the way that George Foreman swings his uppercut, he's going to eat at the left hook constantly. And then the fight happened, and George Foreman's right uppercut is a problem for Joe Frazier, and he does get hit by the left hook constantly on the chin, completely undefended, after he throws his uppercut, and it doesn't matter, because he just takes it. And that's the stuff that the science of fighting doesn't really consider. That's the stuff that you just have to go, well, he's a young fighter, and the other guy's a little bit older and been beaten up a bit more, so he's probably fine to take those punches right now. Might be something you want to work on, I don't know, pretty immediately before he starts fighting really high-level opposition who aren't washed. Wasn't all bad, though. I don't want to... I have harped on Michael Morales' sort of flaws here, but there was some stuff I really liked. If you watched him wrestle off the fence against Gilbert Burns, he looked brilliant. They were in the over-under. He starts pushing Gilbert Burns' hand down into his chest, steps off the fence, elbows him on that side, grabs a collar tie, and then elbows him on the other side, and then just starts wailing on him. And that was the beginning of the end for Gilbert. He's big, talented. I definitely think he has the potential to be a very, very, very good fighter. Top 3, 4 sort of guy. Maybe even champion. But he's got a weird mix where he will fight cautiously in some of these fights, and he will fight behind nice long jabs and things. But he's not cautious in the don't drop your hands and put your chin up in the air and just run in swinging sort of way. It's like there's a switch between fighting safe and fighting dumb. And he can only do what a kid does with a light switch and just go bang, 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 bang between them. Where really you need a little bit more defensive consideration while you're on offense and not being so laid back and now I'm working my jab and not doing much when you're fighting defensively. What I do love, though, is seeing the top end of this welterweight division rapidly changing over. I mean, Jack Della Maddalena, I've been singing his praises for ages, but I openly said I didn't expect him to do so well against Bilal. Masterclass mode was engaged in that fight. And I think a lot of people sort of overlooked him, and now they're like, oh my God, JDM's really good. Ian Gary obviously lost against Shavkat, but has been fighting in a way where, at least after the MVP thing where everyone got mad at him for not standing and trading with MVP, it's pretty obvious that he's pretty elite. And then Shavkat, who we were all excited for from the start anyway. But honestly, this sort of thing needs to happen at the top end of lightweight. I mean, as much as I love Dustin Poirier, Charles Oliveira, Justin Gaethje, there needs to be some movement in that division. The guys like Rafael Fiziev, who are supposed to be coming up, and then they just can't. and those guys are getting older, and at some point you need some new talent in there. And it is such a strong division. And I'm not saying it's because those guys are, I'm not saying it's a lack of talent in the division. Those guys could be all-time greats. This could be an all-time great field of lightweights. But it does mean that the top end is a little bit sort of stagnated. So what else on this card? Co-main was Marin Santos versus my boy Sadiq Youssef. We were supposed to have Paul Craig versus Bellato. That was they showed Bellato walking into the arena and then they cancelled it on the night. I saw a thing going around from his Instagram saying like, sorry, I've had a herpes flare up or something. But, I suspect that was doctored or, just someone memeing. But I mean, Ian Gary fought with herpes on his face in the UFC, which makes you question what the doctors are even doing. Every bloody week, someone comes out there with a giant weeping staph infection on their pec. And the whole internet goes, oh, looks like so-and-so has staph. And the betting line moves. And then after the fight, they go, yeah, I had staph. And you go, but you were cleared by the doctor. So what is the doctor even doing? Mind you, Michael Bisping got cleared to fight with one eye for years, so fight doctors, not the most reliable people in the world. But that basically saved us from watching Paul Craig get knocked out again. So co-main event was Myron Santos versus Sadiq Youssef. Honestly, I thought Myron Santos looked great. I really was impressed by this lad. Sadiq Youssef's on a rough little run, and I say that partly because he's a boy of the podcast. But, coming in from the Contender Series, I was very excited for Sadiq Youssef. And the stuff he did against Andre Fili, he had a good fight with Arnold Allen. He lost to Edson Barboza, but in the first round of that fight, he was beating the piss out of Edson Barboza, and then he tore his shoulder out. And apparently, since then, he's had a lot of injuries, but he got finished quite quickly by Diego Lopez in 2024. And he's just coming back from that April 2024 to May 2025. So you could expect him to look a little bit more gun-shy, but I don't think he did. I thought that Myron Santos just looked... When you spar with someone who is really good at reading you and is just really experienced and calm, and everything you throw, they check or they avoid, it's really disheartening. And that's what it looked like in here, because Myron Santos... Sadiq would throw like a good low kick, and Santos would just check it perfectly. There was a moment along the fence. Sadiq Youssef cornered him along the fence. He threw a right high kick, a right straight as his leg was coming down, and then he immediately level changed. And that's a high level thing to do, because you've distracted the guy with a high kick, you've poked him with the right straight after the high kick, which is in itself a good setup, striking wise, and then you're changing levels onto his hips. Myron Santos didn't widen his base and have to work with the overhook and the wrist and stuff. Myron Santos blocked the kick, slipped the punch, and then dropped his hands and dug them underneath Sadiq's armpits and pulled him up. He did the takedown defense that is like the most basic. That's what they used to teach, go back to the old days of MMA. It's like, get double underhooks. And the problem with it was always that you have to drop your hands, which is really dangerous if the guy's throwing punches. So the whole point of like throwing punches to set up shots along the fence is so that the guy's hands are out of position. And Myron Santos reacted and was still in position to put his hands underneath Sadiq Youssef and pull him up. So when you're doing everything right like that, and you still can't get the guy out of position, basically, that's got to be really disheartening. There were a lot of moments in this fight where, like, Sadiq would throw a low kick, Santos would check it perfectly, and then he threw... I mean, I'm always banging on about the Yoza kick because it's such a cool kick, but I think it perfectly... This little instance in the fight perfectly shows you why the Yoza kick is such a useful kick. Because he did it a million times to Edson Barboza, and it really threw Barboza off. It's where you use your back leg to front kick them in the back quad. And it's named after Yuki Yoza, who popularized it in kickboxing a couple of years ago, and now everyone does it in kickboxing all the time, or at least Japanese kickboxing. There's a moment in this fight, I think in the third round, where Sadiq Youssef throws a hard low kick, Santos checks it, and then he immediately throws a Yoza kick to the back leg, and Santos eats it full on the quad and looks uncomfortable, because it's a weird kick that you don't really expect to have to defend a lot. And that's the strength of it. I really liked Santos's stance in this one, quite high, which he was quite high and quite upright, which means that he can check the kicks a lot more easily. And Sadiq Youssef is a guy who really does like to work with his low kicks. He was happily low kicking with Edson Barboza, which is something you're not supposed to do. But as we always talk about on this podcast, just because someone has good low kicks doesn't mean you can't hit them with good low kicks. I thought his jab looked excellent. Was it a jab that cut Sadiq open? Oh, it was one of those high kicks. Yeah, the other thing about a nice high upright stance is that you can throw high kicks on the counter. They maybe don't have a huge amount of wallop, but a shin coming up from the floor and flicking across your head is enough to knock you out. There's tons of examples of guys just sort of flicking their foot up towards someone's head and it knocking them senseless. But you don't see a lot of counter high kicking in MMA. You don't even see enough of it in kickboxing. If you watch Alex Pereira's last loss in kickboxing to Artem Vakitov, who, because Glory couldn't pay Russian fighters due to legal stuff regarding sanctions, they let all their Russian fighters go. So Artem Vakitov, who was a Glory champion, went, oh, I better try MMA then. So they did. He went to Dana White's Contender Series and he won. And Alex Pereira was there, like shaking hands with him afterwards, saying, oh, it's so exciting that you're in MMA. Gets offered the UFC contract. The moment the Glory says that they'll pay Russian fighters again, he goes, nah, screw MMA, actually. I'm going back to kickboxing. So kind of our loss, but really Vakitov is one of the guys in the heavier weight divisions in kickboxing that you really do want to have around when the sport is so dead. But when Vakitov fought Pereira, he did a wonderful job of like coming out of exchanges with Pereira and throwing up high kicks. And he's shorter than Pereira, but because Pereira would lean after throwing his right hand, Vakitov could throw his right high kick up and he'd miss him by the skin of his teeth because Pereira was leaning into it and he'd have to react. So Myron Santos, he might have been on my radar. You know, you go back and listen to the podcast, I'll have mentioned him at some point because I watch all these fights and have to talk about them. But this is like a boy-making performance for me. I was very impressed by him. Anything else on this card? Melky Costa versus Julian Erosa. Erosa's always been a favourite of mine, partly because he's exciting and flawed. I don't need everyone to be perfect. I need to be excited and see cool things and stuff like that. And Julian Erosa finishes fights a lot, fights really aggressively, has a god-awful chin. That's just the perfect mix for an exciting fighter. And he's really good. You know, last week I spent the whole time moaning about how Team Lobo, Alexa Grasso, Diego Lopez, Irene Aldana, they can't cut the ring. And it's really obvious when an opponent starts circling that they don't know what to do. And I mean, in theory, that's basic stuff, but it's like, that's clearly not being worked on because they do it fight after fight. Watch Julian Erosa fight, and he backs people up and he puts them on the fence. Someone else was doing a good job cutting the ring on this card, actually. Might have been Gabe Green. I thought he looked quite good. Oh no, Hyun-Sung Park. That lad was cutting the ring well in this card. We'll talk about him in a minute, but if you go watch Julian Erosa stopping Charles Jourdain, which I think was 2021, that is just a pressure cooker performance. He's just walking him down, and then eventually Darce chokes him after banging him with a few good punches. Also beat Paddy Pimblett back in the day in Cage Warriors, and they robbed him. But Melky Costa, he came, you know, he's a lot of these guys on these cards I forget because I see them fight and I talk about it, and then they also, it's really not helped by the shorts. They all just blur into the same person. But obviously Melky Costa, I was going to say he doesn't, it's not actually that obvious anymore. He's just got like little patches, but he has had vitiligo. And obviously I think he's like the only fighter on the roster who has really obvious vitiligo. So I noticed him early on, and it's been a really nice surprise how much he's improved. He fought he came into the UFC in 2023. Has it really only been that long? 2023 against Thiago Moises, and he got finished in the second round. There might have been a short notice debut, actually, because he came from LFA rather than through the Contender Series. But he was kind of unimpressive in his subsequent couple of fights. He lost to Steve Garcia, who is actually hot shit at the moment. But then he's on a 4-fight run here. Well, he's just been getting better and better. And he beat Andre Fili, who I consider a very good fighter. He beat Christian Rodriguez, who has been like the prospect killer. And now he was in against Erosa, completely different kind of fighter, gets pushed to the cage, and he basically fought the whole fight with his back on the cage, but striking decently. Kicks look great, punches look crisp, defense looked good, which was the key part, because Julian Erosa will hurt you badly if you don't have your defense on point and he pressures you to defense, because obviously there's no retreat for you there. And the other thing that really impressed me this one was his sort of judo, his like trips and clinch work. Julian Erosa would press him for defense and he threatened to throw him and then get off. In the third round, when they're both sort of tired, he walks up to Julian Erosa, puts his lead foot on the outside of Julian Erosa's lead foot, slaps him in the head and just throws him down with an osotogari, the cross buttock or whatever you want to call it, the thing that John Jones did to Stipe and Piotr Yan does all the time, Zabit used to do it all the time. But he did it so nonchalantly that I had to go back and watch it again because I was like, did Julian Erosa just pull guard in this third round? Honestly, a really good back and forth fight. They take lumps out of each other, and it's quite technical as well. I didn't even realise that Julian Erosa was on a 3-fight winning streak and a 3-fight finish streak. Because he's actually a really weird story in that he's on his third run in the UFC, which kind of, you know, matches up with what I just told you about his chin, because he'd have a great fight and then he'd get smoked and then he'd lose a couple in a row. They'd go, get out, Julian. And then he wouldn't be, you know, he'd be too good for the regional scene and they'd go, come on back in, Julian. And the same thing would happen again, but he's actually been on a, well, they're keeping him around longer now because I think they know that he's pretty money when you watch him fight. Gabe Green versus Mateus Cameo. I thought Green was looking decent, and then Cameo in the second round was pushing to the fence. There was Cameo fell off the top with was it an armbar attempt? But he switched it to a triangle, and then he sort of gassed himself out doing that, and ended up getting choked. Fair enough. Gabe Green's been off for a long time. His last fight was the Gary one, and Ian Gary's had like 7 fights since then. So Always good to see someone come back from a long layoff and not just look awful. My boy Jared Gordon knocked out Thiago Moises. Thiago Moises, I swear every other fight he meets someone who doesn't know what to do with a calf kick. And people go, oh my God, Thiago Moises has had a revolution. It's the Thiago Moises renaissance. That guy, his striking, mwah. And then you see him against someone who doesn't just get kicked in the leg and go, oh my God, what do I do? He's kicking my leg. And then he loses. So what happened here, literally the first exchange of the fight, Thiago Moises throws the calf kick and Jared Gordon, presumably having watched at least one Thiago Moises fight, goes, nope, and just runs through him into a takedown. Roughs him up a bit from top, and then when they got to boxing, Moises did actually catch him a couple of times and get him bleeding, but Gordon hit him with the cross counter across the top, right straight across the top of the jab. Oh no, I think it was inside the left hook, but smoked him. Gordon's hands are always a really pleasant surprise. And the Paddy Pimblett loss, even though he was robbed, it's aging like a fine wine for him. Yadiev Del Valle, which I have no idea how to say, versus Conor Matthews. This was just an interesting fight because it demonstrated a principle that I'm always talking about, which is if you can get the guy kicking and you could actually use a little bit of Muay Thai, Sanshao, whatever, catching technique, that is about 100 times easier than setting up a takedown or finishing a takedown along the fence. So I'm always talking about the cut kick, which is where you get the guy kicking at you and you kick his standing leg while he's trying to kick you. Easy takedown. But the other one is Del Valle came out throwing hard, I think he was the southpaw, he's throwing hard left kicks at Conor Matthews. Conor Matthews finally throws one back. Del Valle takes it on his left forearm, brings his right arm underneath to scoop underneath the leg, and then just lifts the leg as high as possible and runs at Conor Matthews. And Conor Matthews falls over next to the cage. If you want to see a great example of this in action, Edward Foliang, who was super washed by the time of this fight, he fought Amir Khan. I think they fought 3 times actually, but it was the most recent one, I think. Amir Khan throws a high kick at him, and this happened several times in the fight. Foliang catches it on one forearm, brings the other one underneath, pushes it up, and steps in, and he adds a little foot sweep on the standing leg as well, and just throws the guy. Because once he's on one leg, and you lift the other leg up higher, all you got to do is get him to fall. And honestly, after you've caught it on the forearm like that, and you've got it trapped between your forearms, that can be easier to finish than when you've done like the Matouj Gamrot, trying to lift the leg as high as possible with your hands. So Matthews turned his back and Del Valle got the rear naked choke. Luana Santos finished a girl by an Americana from the mount. And I was just the gif of the duck smoking the blunt and shaking his head and going, classic. Classic women's MMA. I say that, I've been Americana'd by good black belts, really good black belts. But then, really good black belts can do whatever they want to be honest. This was so simple. She just put the girl on the bottom, put her hand in Luana Santos's armpit, and Luana Santos just peeled it out and put it on the floor and Americana'd her. Probably shouldn't be working. But the one that you always see in women's MMA is the scarf hold Americana, where you put the hand between your legs. And that is, if you're stuck in the scarf hold, it's a legit move, but you shouldn't be stuck in the scarf hold in the first place. You let someone grab you by the head and do the head and arm throw. Standard women's MMA stuff. Denise Gomez versus Elise Reed. We talked about the jab earlier that got her murdered, but in the first round, I was like, oh, Elise Reed's doing well with her hands. And they're going, oh, but she's carrying them very low. Oh, it's that Taekwondo background. And then the moment she throws a low kick, she gets banged with the right hand on the counter, which is how 95% of first round knockouts in MMA happen now. You come out, you throw a hard low kick, the other guy throws a right hand at the same time, and you're like, oh no, I'm unconscious. But this just reminded me so much of Robertus Despan or any other guy who's billed as like a Taekwondo guy. The moment they throw a kick, which is 100% of the scoring offense in Taekwondo, they get bundled over and look like shit. The other one on this card that would deserve some time, I'm not going to talk about Tisha Pennington's fight, because the stat that always comes up is that she has 2 finishes in 22 UFC fights or whatever it is. I get you can have fun fights without finishing people, but if there's not even like the vague risk that you might finish someone, I cannot enjoy your fights, to be honest. But Hyun Sung Park, he was cool. He came through the Road to UFC series, the way that they trick Asian fighters in here. It's like tough, but they go, people won't understand what these Asian fighters are saying. Do a tournament. The one time we allow a tournament is to bring in these Asian fighters. And to be honest, those tournaments are pretty good. And it just makes you angry that the UFC doesn't do more tournaments. But he had a bit of a softball in his UFC debut, as in like his first proper UFC fight. He fought Shannon Ross, who has been knocked out by everyone. Like, he was just in there in the flyweight division being smoked by everyone. But this fight I thought was great. Cut the cage on him, put him to the fence, hit him with these short right hands, and then he was doing this beautiful thing where he'd throw the 1-2, and as he threw the 2, he'd step down the right to his right down the side of the opponent. And that would set up either the left knee to the body on the cage or the left hook to the body on the cage, followed by the left knee when they clinched. Worked really well. And then once he hit the fence for like the third time, he ducked behind the guy, put him on the mat, got on his back and choked him. Honestly, guy looks great. And I've been watching loads of Caol Uno this week, and this dude has stolen like Caol Uno's lips, nose, and ears. Caol Uno, well, I was watching the Joachim Hansen fight, which was K1 Heroes' first big lightweight fight, and that was 20 years ago. I was watching that fight and going, damn, those guys are really good. Like, Caol Uno's hitting him with Sasai Surakomi-Ashi's, Joachim Hansen's playing this beautiful guard, Caol Uno's doing some awesome passing, and then ends with that awesome knee, and Joachim Hansen throws his mouthpiece into the crowd and hits Caol Uno's mum while she's crying about Caol Uno being unconscious. But I'm going to do a film room on that fight because it is so good, and no one owns the rights to it. Or at least, if it's K1 that owns the rights to it, they're too busy having no money and losing all their fighters. So I think I managed about 20 minutes there. I thought that was all right, yeah. Not bad for a card where none of the known names were fighting. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Sign up to Patreon. Go listen to the big questions and answers podcast I did last week because I was so unimpressed by the idea of previewing this card. And we'll be back later in the week to talk about whatever's going on this weekend. Cheers. Chris Tognoni running into the fighters again. Bless.